Morning, learning. We're on Daf Gimel on the base. Learning is discussed for Shleima, for Ilana Chaya Basarach, also for Shira Bashalamis. My cousin in Eretz Yisrael just emailed us that her married daughter, her first cousin, her married daughter was in a terrible accident. Like a broken spine and a lot of internal injuries. So they just said that she's in surgery right now. So she'll be discussed for Shleima. Sagt die Gemara, by the two dots. Rabbi Yossi bar Ami Rami Shini Kodesh Hashini Bailam Umeshani. He asks the same question that we had asked before, Lagabi, whether Mino Machrba, the Lab Mino Loy Machrba. We had asked it from Rav had said that if you're Shecht Achatas L'Shem Oila, it's going to be possible. L'Shem Chulin, it's kosher. So that seems to prove the Lamina Le Machrba. But then we asked the kasha from Teichai. So we're going to ask similar questions with slightly different sources for the two sheetas. Shini Kodesh is what we've been talking about till now. We've been talking about where someone has a machshava that he's bringing a chatas. It's been a chatas from the time it was separated and it was brought to the Beis Hamikdash, and now all of a sudden the kohen decides he thinks it's a oila. That's shini kodesh. A shini bailam is where rather than mistaking what carbon he's bringing, he makes a mistake about who the owner is. Mishani, and he answers. So what's the kasha? Mi amar Rav chatashach l'shem chatas ksher l'shem oila psula. Didn't Rav say that a chatas that was brought l'shem chatas, meaning if he has a chatas for eating dam, which is a lav, and at the time that it's brought, he thinks that it was brought. The kohen thinks it was brought for chatas for eating chaylev, for eating non-kosher fat. We say that's kosher. That's not a shinui. But l'shem oila, if he does l'shem oila, that's possible because that's a shinui. The chatas comes pasul and gansen. That's a shinui kodesh. He had in mind a different carbon. It's possible, right? Everyone agrees that that's a regular case of shinui kodesh. So you have the chatas l'shem oila. It's going to be possible. The lav mina machrba, the mina loy machrba. So you see from here that the lav mina, if he has a machshava of oila when he's bringing a chatas, that destroys the chatas and makes it a machshava shaloi lishma. But if he just had a machshava, he thought a different type of chatas. He thought a chatas. The kohen thought he was bringing a chatas for dam and it was really a chatas for chaylev, or vice versa. That's not going to destroy it. So you see, if it's in the same category, it doesn't block. It doesn't cause a problem. Which is what we had seen. That's the opposite of the rule that we had seen before from Rav, where they changed this to Rav over here, but that doesn't really make a difference. Over here we're saying the opposite. Before we had said that l'shem chulin is going to be kosher because it's lav minah, so therefore it's loy machrba. Now we're saying the minah loy machrba, the lav minah machrba. Fakert, that the thing that's in the same category does not harm it, is not a problem, and if it's in a different category, it does, which is all, of course, relative. Obviously, if you look at it, it's really a continuum. Having a machshava shalei lishma, where he thinks his chatas was for dam and it's really for chaylev, is a small difference, relatively similar. So we would look at it that he's not having a machshava shalei lishma at all. The Gemara is characterizing it as the minah loy machrba. But what it really means is that it's saying he's not having a machshava shalei lishma. Then the next step is to have a machshava for a different carbon. So we say, over here, we're saying he's shecht for another carbon, that's going to be a machshava shalei lishma, because that's a classic shalei lishma. We're characterizing that over here as the lav mina machrba. And then we say, Rav said earlier that if he has l'shem chulin, which is even the furthest off, Rav had said that that's not going to be shaloi lishma, because then again, that's like the extremes meet. It's so far off of this being the same thing as the carbon that it doesn't even, it's not also not considered Shaloi Lishma. But anyway, the Gemara is not characterizing that way. At this point, the Gemara is asking that the Chatas Shechtel L'Shem, if you say Shechtel L'Shem Chatas L'Ksher, you see in the Minah is not Machrav, and the Lam Minah, if he has L'Shem Eila, it is Machrav. The Gemara Rav Chatas Shechtel Misha Mechuyev Chatas Psula. Al Misha Mechuyev Eila Kshera. We see L'Gabe Machshavas Shimi Bailam. If a person brings the Chatas and he has in mind someone else who's Mechuyev Chatas, then it's possible. But if he has in mind someone who's Mechuyev and Eila, then it's kosher. Alma Debar Mina Machraba, Dela Mina Loy Machraba. So now we're bringing from the case of Shini Bailam, what we had originally brought was Rav Shita Lagabi. Just like Rav said that if you have a Machshavas Chulin, it's not going to be possible because it's Lav Mina. He has in mind something that's very different than what's at issue here. So that does not destroy the machshava. Did I put on the record? Yeah, I did. But so just like we're saying the same thing. We're getting it from the din of where you have a machshavas about someone who is the person, who's the bailam. We say if it's someone who's similar. So chatas shachta al misha mechuyev chatas, then it's possible because that's the bar mina. But if he has a mina al misha mechuyev oil, it's kosher. Al devar mina machba, the la mina loy machba. So we have this. We have the same question like we had before, just coming from different sources. Umeshani, and they switched the chasam and the hacha over here. Hacha v'shachat oisel chatas amrachmana, arichatas l'shem chatas nishkata. Where we say that you have to. Where a person has a machshava on one chatas, where the kohen has a machshavas of one chatas, and it was really a different chatas, the Torah says chatas, as long as it's l'shem chatas, it doesn't make a difference which chatas, what caused the chatas. The Torah says the Gabi having in mind which chaver, you have in mind that not the person who brought the carbon, but someone else, the person who's getting apart from the carbon. It says the keeper Allah on him. And now he shouldn't have on his friend. So he dashed in the pasuk. It has to be someone similar to him. So these are both psukim that told you what the halacha is in these things. So you can't learn anything legabi the rule of the bar mina machraba the la mina loy machraba. Rav Chaviva Rami shine bailam atar teichai. Rav Chaviva asks from shine bailam, which we just said is a raya that the bar mina machraba the la mina loy machraba. He asks him atar teichai umeshani. And he answered, "Umi amar Rav Chad Shachta Misha Mechuyev Chatas Pula Misha Mechuyev Oil Kshera Amadimino Macharba." Like we just said, the La Mina Loy Macharba Batanya Toichai Veloy Toichai Afilu Klishet Af Matzel. We had already the same way we had asked this question from the source from the original Memra of Rav, which tells us the La Mina Loy Macharba. So we're bringing a different raya for the klal that the la mina le machraba. So ask the same question that we said that if you have that the Torah tells you that even a kli that's within another kli charas is going to stop the tumah from going, and we say it's even a metal kli. So you see, even the lav mina is the lav mina le machraba. Umeshani, he answers, Abo toichai. It says taich taichai. Taich taichai. It says, first of all, it says instead of saying taich, it should have just said taich. It said taichai. The pasuk, let's see, the pasuk. Cholki charis asher yipol mehem al taichai. Klosha besoicha yitma v'oisei tishabeh. It says, instead it should have just said taich on each one, and it said it twice. That gives you 4 limudim. Chad legufe. One is to tell you that in general, tumah is metama on the inside of a kli charis. And Rashi says the Gzeir Shava tells you that it's not just metama when you touch the inside of a kli charis, but even in the airspace of the kli charis, that can also be metama. In other words, tell you this rule only applies to a kli charis. that one might say that the Torah said a kli cheres is only as an example, but any kli is matam on the inside. Kamashal that it's only kli cheres, but a metal kli, for example, will not be matama from what's inside of it. It'll be matama just by touching. Idach teichai in the last idach, idach teichai v'loy teich teichai. Va'afilu kli shetef matzel. And this Gemara, it's strangely enough, is saying from the fact that we needed a pasuk to tell you that even a kli shetef is matzel, so that tells you that without that it wouldn't have been matzel. So that tells you that we can't bring a raya the la mina. So that's not a stira, even though Rav says that the la mina loy macharba, and over here the la mina is being macharba, but over here it's because of a pasuk, because it says teich teichai, which is exactly the opposite. Before we had asked it as a kasha, since the Torah tells you that the kli shetef is matzel, that's l'chayra raya that we would learn from there. That seems to be that would be a source that the lav mina loy macharba. So this Gemara is looking at exactly the opposite. From the fact that it's a pasuk to tell it to you, that proves that otherwise the lav mina would be macharba. The Gemara earlier had said, since the conclusion of this din, because the Torah tells you that a kli shetef is matzel, so you see the lav mina in the end is matzel.
But I feel like we short of matzel. So it means if we kli cheres, it would not be matzel. So kli cheres for certain.
No, a kli shetef would for sure be matzel.
What does it say?
That means even a kli shetef, even a medically. Certainly, if you have a tumah inside the kli cheres, the question is if you have a second kli inside of that kli cheres, does that stop? Now, a kli cheres is the mina, and the mina is more likely to be matzah than the lav mina. A kli, the mina has relevance here. It's like we said before, before we had answered that if you have a mechitza is lav mina, it's not of the same, not relevant to this discussion. But two kalim, if you have two kalim next to each other, the tumah doesn't go from one kli to the other, because each kli has its own thing. So the question is, in this context, are we going to say that or not? So we're saying a kli shetef, a metal kli, one might say, since it's lav mina, therefore it won't be matzal, even though a kli charis, which is of the same type, certainly is. So that's what the pasuk tells you. No, kli shetef is also matzal, but it's only because the pasuk tells it to you. Not if we didn't, we wouldn't know. So Gemara, where do we know? We're getting past the mina macharba, la mina le macharba. We get a little bit of a parole. Where do we know? Listen, we've back to the original first principles. The Mishnah had told us that a carbon needs to be lishma. If you don't do it lishma, it's going to be, the carbon is kosher, but it's not. It doesn't give a kapara to the baila. So Gemara is asking for that general din that if you have to do a carbon lishma. He said whatever the consequences are, even though the carbon is still going to be kosher, but you still lechatchila, you have to do a lishma. Where do we know that you have to have in mind for this carbon? Maybe you could just bring it and have in mind a different thing. Who says you have to have in mind that it should be for this chatas? Right? Where do you know that a zvicha, a carbon, that the shechting, the slaughter of the carbon, there are 4 avodas that are done for every carbon. You need shchita, you have to slaughter the carbon. Then you need kabbalah, you have to accept the dam, the blood of the carbon. Then you have hilacha, which is bringing over the dam to the mizbeach. And then you have zrika, when you zerek the dam on the mizbeach hachitzim. So we're going to go through one by one all the 4 avodas. Where do you know that each one has to be done having in mind the proper carbon, which carbon is going to be? Not only the beginning of zvicha the amakra, zevach shlamim karbonish, hey zvicha l'shem shlamim. It says zevach. Zevach is a lashon of actually slaughtering. We sort of use it as in the context of zevach shlamim. We would say it means you bring a carbon if it's a carbon of shlam. But the Gemara is darshaning zevach shlamim. What does it have to say? Zevach shlamim. Why are you saying it's a shlam? If it's a so from the fact it says Zevach Shlamim, that tells you that the Zevicha has to be L'Shem Shlam. Correct Gemara. The Dilma Hainu Shemayu. Maybe the name of the carbon is called a Zevach Shlamim, right? We use it in somewhat, that's the way you would teach it. You see, Zevach Shlamim Karbani. You'd say that it's a carbon of Shlamim. So maybe it means that's the name of it, the carbon Shlamim. The Zevach is part of the name. So the Gemara, Milchsev Makav as Dam HaShlamim, Hazayrek as Dam HaShlamim, V'loiksev Zevach, V'achsev Zevach, Shma Minash Teis Vicha L'Shem Shlamim. Gemara says you can't say that that's its name because there's many times that we say Shlamim without Zevach. So Vaistais Zvicha is not part of the name. So the Zevach is to tell you that when you slaughter the animal, it has to be L'Shem Shlam, it has to be L'Shma. Ashkhan Zvicha. So we learned that the slaughtering has to be L'Shma. Shar Avodas Minal. How do we know the other three Avodas? Maybe I'll say we'll learn it out from the slaughtering. That the Zvicha is L'Shma. So all the three other Avodas have to be L'Shma. You say, if someone does the carbon Pesach, he shechs the carbon Pesach, and he doesn't have in mind who the other participants in the carbon Pesach are, that passes the carbon, and that's only relevant, that's only applies to the Shechita, doesn't apply to the Kabbalah, Halacha, and Zrika, so therefore there's a Chumrah in Zvicha, so maybe only Zvicha needs Lishma, because it has that Chumrah Lagabi Pesach. Ela Cross, so we have to learn out the other karbanos from some place. Hamakar is dam shlam. Shtehei kabbalah l'shem shlam. Torah says you should bring the dam close to the mizbeach. So bringing it hamakar, we say it means halacha. Rashi later on is going to explain that means because this hamakar is coming immediately after it says v'shachat, and then it says hamakar. So from the juxtaposition, that tells you that this makrav means to be mekabel adam. The first thing you have to do is first be mekabel adam before you can bring it over. So that tells you the din of Kabbalah, like hamakrav is dam shlam, shnei Kabbalah l'shem shlam. So why did we have to say shchita? Let's learn out shchita from Kabbalah. Kabbalah cannot be done by a zar, by someone who's not a kohen, or by an isha. Masha enken shchita can be done by a zar or an isha. Ashkachan shchita, the Kabbalah zrika minalon. So we learned two of the four. How do we know the zrika? If you say let's learn out zrika, we just learned that shchita and Kabbalah, so let's learn out zrika from the two of them. Zrika and Kabbalah. First of all, they need to be done in the north part of the Chatzar. Masha Enkein Zrika, there's no specific rule that has to be in the Tzafan. In addition, there's always going to be a Shechita and Kabbalah, even if it's one of those Chatayis that are brought, the dam is brought on the inside. But Chatayis Apnimis don't have a Zrika on the Mizbeach HaChitzin. So that's a chumrah on those two. So you can't learn it out from them, from Kabbalah and Halach to Zrika. So what do we know that Zrika needs l'shma? Lamakra hazayrik as dam shlam. Shtei Zrika l'shem shlamim. The Torah says you should throw it l'shlamim. The shlamim, so that tells you the Zrika has to have in mind that it's b'shlam. Let the Torah just say it by Zrika, and we'll learn out Kabbalah and Halach from it. From the Ikalamiv, if a zar does the zrika, he's chayav misa. The din of that doing it, everything has to be done by a kohen except for shchita. But the other two avodas have to be done by a kohen. But there's not going to be a einish misa. The misa is only going to be. We're going to learn later on in the Masechta that the misa is only for being zayrek dam as a zar, a non-kohen. Ashkan kulu halacha minalan. So we have shchita, Kabbalah, and Zrika. How do you know the malach of halacha bringing the dam to the mizbeach? Let's learn that from the other three. Those are all avodas that always have to be done. Halacha, if you shech the carbon right next to the mizbeach, you could be zayrek directly from the animal onto the mizbeach. So you don't necessarily need, or you could, I'm saying you could check, you do it directly into the kli, and then throw from the kli, be served from the kli onto the mizbech, and skip the halacha. If the circumstances make it that there's no halacha needed, it's not. There's no need for halacha. It's not. You're not missing an avodah. It means halacha is only required when there's when it's capable of being halacha. But if there's no possibility of halacha, it's not ma'akav. Elam akrav hikriv esakol hamizbecha. It says vehikriv as a hamizbecha. So vehikriv means to bring something. That's referring to bring the ivarim to the keves, which is not. We're talking about dam. We're just demonstrating the word vehikriv means to bring. The Tanya vehikriv zu kabbalah sadam. But we said hikriva over here is not referring to halacha; it's referring to kabbalah sadam. Because, like we said from Rashi, Rashi says from the fact that it says hikriva immediately after the shchita, so that what happens immediately after shchita, you always have to have kabbalah sadam. So that must be referring to the kabbalah sadam. We already learned that kabbalah needs to be lishma. Since we learned kabbalah, we learned it was a lashon krivu, which really means halacha. But since it's right after shchita, we were forced to say it first kabbalah. But instead of saying kabbalah, we used the lashon krivu. It should have said the kibul as hadam. Why does it say halacha? To tell you that halacha has the same din as kabbalah, that it has to be lishma. So we learned whenever the Torah says kabbalah needs to be lishma, the halacha is also going to have to be lishma. So we have all four things. So we have learned that there's a mitzvah lechatchila. You have to do all four avodas lishma. Shina ba'alam minolim. How do we know? Like we said before, we said there are 6 things the person has to have in mind. One of them is for the same ba'alam, and has to have in mind not just which carbon you're bringing, but who the ba'alam are. Who's the person who's getting a kapara? So where do you know that that also has to be lishma? It says the basar of the zevach toida shlama. The Torah says, what do I have to say? Zevach toida shlama. Again, we have the extra word zevach, like we said before. What is it telling you? That the zvicha, that the shchita should be l'shem the toida. Toida is one of the types of karbanos. As we're going to see, it's a subcategory of shlamim. So when you bring a toida, you have to do the shchita l'shem toida. Now, we already learned from zevach shlamim karbonic. Now, you have to do the carbon. You have to shech the carbon l'shem which carbon, having in mind which carbon, which is shini kodesh. So that's already learned. So therefore, we switch it over, Meina Union. If we don't have a use for it over here, we use it for the next closest thing. So the next closest thing is to tell you that the shchita has to be the shema, it has to be l'shem the baila. Is that what this pasuk come to teach you? Besides it's coming to tell you, it says, the toida of your shlomim. It's coming to tell you that a toida is a kind of shlomim. A shlomim is not a kind of toida. Shlomim is the bigger category. It includes within it a toida. So you could call your toida a shlomim. If you and you have in mind a shlomim when you bring a toida, toida is a kind of shlom. But if you bring a shlom and you have in mind a toida, meaning a stam a shlom, that's not a toida, and you have in mind a toida, that's not. You can't. If you were bringing like a shlomim as a whatever, not because something good happens. Toida is brought like when you go on a trip or you're saved from taken out of prison as a specific thing. But if you bring it stam as an adava, you can't have in mind toida because that's a different thing. So that's what we learn out from this zevach toida shlama. So how do you know shchita l'shalei l'shem bailam is possible? Ma haifer bein zeh l'zeh toida kuya shlama bein shlama kuya toida. So that's what the pasuk is telling you. So he answers, "Anami zevach karmina." He says, "No, I'm learning that's toida shlama. I'm learning from the word zevach. Zevach is extra. It's going to tell you that the shchita has to be l'shem bailam." I need Zevach over there first. We learned the limit from that also. Where do we, the pasuk over there is saying that you have to how long you have to eat it. So it says that a chatas has to be eaten within 1 day and 1 night. I'm sorry, that the shlum has to be eaten within a taida has to be eaten within 1 day and 1 night. But how do you know chatas and asham have the same din? Time alone is zevach. So zevach is coming to tell you not just a taida, but also chatas and asham have the same limitations on time. So because imkein nichtav kra ubasar taida shlam of zevach. It should have said the word zevach after ubasar taida shlam, because the pasuk then continues. It says b'yom karbon yachal la yanich menu ad baika. So it's zevach, which is telling us chatash and asham should have been right near the part that tells you the limitation of how long you have to eat it. So my zevach. So why did it say zevach earlier? Shema no tarti. So able to learn out both things. We can learn out shchita has to be l'shem ba'alim, and we could also learn out chatas asham. So come on, Ashkan Zvicha, we know Zvicha, Shavadis Minola, and how do we know the rest of the Avodas? We know Zvicha for Shina Bailam. How do we know the other Avodas Shina Bailam? If you'll say, let's learn it out of Shchita, like we said before, when we talk about Shina Kai, the same thing by Shina Bailam, that apostles, Shchita apostles, Shaloi L'Shem Oichlam, Mashenk and the other Avodas do not. So the Gemara remember Zvicha b'Shini Kodesh, remember Zvicha b'Shini Ba'alim, Maz Zvicha Amur b'Shini Kodesh, L'chalakta ben Zvicha l'Shavadis, Av Zvicha Amur b'Shini Ba'alim, L'techel Gaba ben Zvicha l'Shavadis. The Gemara says, okay, I'll tell you how I know the other Avodas. Since we learned that a Shchita Shaloi, all four, it says Zvicha, it says Shchita by Shini Kodesh has to be Lishma, and then we expanded it. We had Limudim tell you all four Avodas by Shini Kodesh have to be Lishma. So now when we say that the Shchita by Shini Ba'alim has to be L'Shem the Bailam, so it also will expand to be all four avodas. We'll learn it out from Shini Kodesh. If we have a bunch of kasha there. Mal Shini Kodesh, Shchem Psula Begufa. Shini Kodesh, he's having machshava about the carbon itself. Masha Enkin Shini Bailam, you're having a machshava about the Bailam. It's not as direct. It's not a Psul Begufa. V'yashna Baba Avodas, and also it applies to all four avodas, which Rashi says that this din of Shini Bailam does not work. That if you have in mind when you're doing the Zriko or the Kabbalah or the Ilacha or the Shchita or the Shchita, Kabbalah or Ilacha, if you have a machshava that it's not for the Bailam, that's not going to passel. It's only if you have something which you're going to see by Pigel, the same sort of thing. You have to machshava to do the Zrika Shaloi L'Shem Bailam. The Zrika is the part that's machaper. That's where the Shini Bailam affects it. In addition, it applies, Shini Kodesh applies La'achar Misa. But Shini Bailam, once the Bailam are not there, it's the Yarshim that are bringing it. There's no L'chayr, according to this man, the Amad, there's no Shini Bailam. V'yeshna b'tzibur kiliyachid. And also applies by a tzibur, Shini Kodesh. But there's no Shini Bailam by a tzibur, because everyone's included. Even two of these things you could answer. What's the two of them you could answer? You're saying that the machshava of Shini Kodesh is not Psul B'Gufay. I'll let you go. We'll stop over here. We'll have to review this on Motzei Shabbos.